Just unbelievably massive that it doesn't just change a skyline, it actually alters the ocean's
Oh,
currents.
yeah. It's wild.
Right. Or picture this. Local marine birds being forced to physically sing louder just to be heard over the hum of offshore machinery.
Which is something nobody was really predicting a few years ago.
Exactly. And today we are taking a hard, objective look at the reality check that is currently hitting the offshore wind industry. For years, you and I have heard the massive projections, right? Ambitious, clean energy goals, promises of cheap power, thousands of jobs.
Yeah, the classic blueprints.
But now we finally have real world data to compare against those original models. So, welcome to today's deep dive into the sources.
It is such a fascinating pivot point to explore. We're looking at that exact moment in the life cycle of major infrastructure when theoretical projections basically crash headfirst into real-world experience.
Yeah, moving from the computer model to the actual ocean.
Right, because what it was modeled to be on a spreadsheet is very different from what it actually is when you factor in, say, inflation or the complexities of maritime law and just the sheer physical brutality of operating in saltwater.
And to guide us through this transition, we are unpacking a really compelling stack of sources today. We've got a mid-year analysis report titled Offshore Wind at Mid-Year, From Projection to Experience.
A great title,
It
honestly.
really is. It's authored by Dr. Michelle Parsons, who is the executive director of the Caesar Rodney Institute, or CRI. We also have some background files on CRI's mission and Dr. Parsons herself.
And her background is, well, it's going to completely change how you view this data.
Oh, absolutely. We'll get into that a bit later because it is fascinating. But first, if we want to understand this massive shift from theory to reality, we really have to follow the money.
Always. You always follow the money. Because the very first indicator that an industry is leaving the projection phase is, well, how the major players adjust their wallets.
Right.
And right now, the financial adjustments detailed in the report are just staggering. I mean, these aren't minor quarterly budget tweaks.
No, we are seeing global energy titans making multi-billion-dollar U-turns here. Okay, let's unpack this because the sheer scale of the capital moving around it's wild. Look at Shell, for instance.
Yeah, Shell is a huge one.
They recently announced plans to divest more than $1 billion in their offshore wind assets. And their stated goal, to refocus those investments on oil, natural gas, and LNG.
Right. And it isn't just Shell. BP is slashing its planned renewable energy spending by more than $5 billion a year.
Wait, $5 billion?
A year.
A year, while simultaneously boosting their oil and gas investment up to $10 billion. What's fascinating here is the underlying mechanism driving this macroeconomic trend.
Okay, what do you mean?
Well, these developers are actively reassessing billion-dollar bets because the capital cost of building in the ocean is proving to be fundamentally different than what the early financial models predicted.
Ah, so the math changed. Exactly. The cost of raw materials, the interest rates on the borrowing required to build these things, the specialized ships needed for installation. I mean, all of it has just skyrocketed.
Which makes sense, you know? It's like mapping out this massive multi-million-dollar dream home renovation on paper when borrowing money is basically free.
Right, the dream phase.
Yeah, but then the contractor hands you the actual updated bill for the lumber in today's economy. Suddenly you're rethinking the whole addition.
That is a perfect analogy, and we are seeing this caution from developers right here in the U.S. too. Take Dominion Energy. They are behind the Coastal Virginia Offshore Wind South project.
Which is a massive proposed project, right? Like $4.5 billion.
Yep, $4.5 billion. Now, they recently renewed a 5-year option to purchase 32 acres of land in Virginia Beach for the project. And they've already sunk at least $200 million into it.
$200 million. That's not small change.
No, but the critical detail there is their public stance on it. Despite that $200 million investment, Dominion is openly acknowledging that this remains only a, quote, future development option.
Wow.
They admit they have no firm timeline, no firm budget, and no firm construction schedule.
Right, because you don't spend $200 million and then say, we don't really have a timeline unless the internal math is telling you to hit the brakes hard.
Exactly. They're preserving the option, holding the land, but delaying the actual multi-billion-dollar plunge.
And the technical hurdles are driving up costs internationally as well, right? The report mentions Equinor.
Yeah, Equinor is a great example. They hold a provisional lease about 26 miles off the mouth of the Delaware Bay. But over in Norway, Equinor is actually urging Norwegian officials to consider keeping future bottom-fixed wind projects closer to shore.
And that's because of the transmission lines, right? The report specifically mentions the massive costs of high voltage direct current or HVDC lines. But, like, why is that such a deal breaker? I mean, we lay underwater cables all the time.
We do, but typically with alternating current, or AC.
Okay.
The problem is that AC power degrades over long distances underwater. So if your wind farm is 20 or 30 miles offshore, you can't just run a standard AC cable to the beach.
You lose too much power.
Exactly. You have to convert that AC power to high voltage direct current HVDC to make the trip efficiently. And to do that, you have to build these massive multi-thousand-ton converter stations right in the middle of the ocean.
Wait, so they basically look like offshore oil rigs, but just for electrical conversion?
That is exactly what they look like.
Yeah.
And they are astronomically expensive to build, install, and maintain out in the deep water.
So let me get this straight. The further out into the ocean you go to catch the better wind and, avoid ruining the coastal view, the more you absolutely obliterate your profit margin trying to get the electricity back to the grid.
Precisely. That physical reality is why companies like Ørsted, who is one of the largest developers on the planet, are restructuring their portfolios.
They're bringing in outside institutional investors, right?
Yeah, and essentially returning to the negotiating table to beg for more government subsidies just to make the financing work.
Which naturally leads us to one of the most debated financial maneuvers in the entire report, the Invenergy buyout.
Oh, yeah. This one is huge.
So Invenergy essentially agreed to surrender its federal offshore wind leases. And in exchange, they received a $765 million reimbursement from the Trump administration.
Just a massive sum of money.
Right. And the stated goal of this buyout was to allow the company to pivot those funds into domestic natural gas and geothermal energy projects. That specific agreement brought the total amount of federal offshore wind lease buyouts to nearly $2.6 billion.
It's a huge shift in capital.
But hold on, though. Getting $750 million to surrender a lease? I mean, critics are looking at this and calling it a massive taxpayer bailout for a private company's bad math.
Yeah, that is definitely one side of the argument.
So is that a fair assessment, or is the government just paying a premium to free up that ocean space? Because voluntarily surrendering a lease and getting paid for it sounds like a pretty sweet deal for the developer.
It is a highly contentious move, and the report does a good job of laying out exactly why it's so polarizing. So the critics argue exactly what you just said. They really question the legality of using public taxpayer funds to reimburse private developers who willingly chose to back out of their leases just because their profit margins shrank.
They see it as a straight-up bailout.
Exactly. But on the flip side, supporters of the buyout argue that it is a strategic necessity. Their view is that tying up billions of dollars in stalled offshore wind projects doesn't actually help the energy grid at all.
Because the energy isn't getting produced.
Right. So by buying back those leases, the government allowed that capital to be immediately redirected into domestic natural gas and geothermal projects, energy sources that can be developed and brought online much, much faster.
Okay, so it really comes down to a debate between the principle of taxpayer liability versus the pragmatism of energy independence.
Exactly. It's a fundamental policy clash.
But regardless of where you fall in that debate, if the math is that brutal for the developers, what happens to the contracts and the leases they've already signed? Because you can't just shift billions of dollars in federal policy without a fight.
Oh, you absolutely cannot. When the economics get this messy, the very next thing that happens is everyone calls their lawyers.
Naturally.
The legal landscape has become a primary battlefield for offshore wind. It's no longer just about engineering. It's about jurisdiction.
And the report highlights a massive interstate lawsuit challenging those exact lease termination agreements we just talked about.
Right.
We are talking about a coalition of 7 northeastern states from New York and New Jersey all the way up through New England to Maine. They have banded together to sue the federal government, challenging the Trump administration's authority to execute those buyouts.
And while that massive multi-state suit is playing out, we saw a separate action where a federal court in Massachusetts temporarily blocked the Department of the Interior from relying on portions of its new offshore wind permitting policies.
Wait, let me stop you there, because if you are listening to this, you might be wondering how this legal web actually works in practice. If a federal judge up in Massachusetts issues a ruling about permitting, why does that stall a project all the way down in Delaware?
It's a great question. It comes down to the fundamental nature of the ocean. These aren't local zoning disputes, right? These projects operate in federal waters.
Ah, okay.
That means they're overseen by federal agencies like the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, or BOEM. So when a federal court in Massachusetts issues an injunction against a federal agency's policies, it creates this huge domino effect across the entire country.
So the Department of the Interior had to just hit pause.
Exactly. They had to stop and evaluate what that Massachusetts ruling meant for their authority everywhere else.
Which directly delayed the legal timeline for projects in other states.
Yes. For instance, right in Delaware, the Caesar Rodney Institute has an ongoing federal lawsuit challenging BWAM over their approval of the U.S. wind project.
Right.
The federal government's legal response in that Delaware case was originally scheduled for June 26th. But because of the ripple effects of that Massachusetts ruling, the deadline had to be pushed back to July 24th.
And the litigation isn't just at the federal level either. CRI is also a plaintiff in an entirely separate state-level lawsuit in Delaware.
Yes, against DNRC.
Right, the Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control. And that one is over the permits for the transmission infrastructure.
That dual-track litigation perfectly illustrates the jurisdictional nightmare of offshore wind. You have lawsuits over the spinning turbines in federal waters, and simultaneous lawsuits over the high-voltage wires coming ashore in state waters.
It's a mess. And just to add another layer of complexity to it, while these federal and state lawsuits are dragging out in the courts, the Delaware General Assembly actually passed House Bill 456. Yeah, that bill is designed to try and streamline the permitting process for infrastructure in the inland bays, and it's currently waiting for Governor Meyer's signature.
So you have the courts potentially blocking things, think tanks suing over the permits, and the state legislature trying to speed the exact same process up.
It's pure chaos. It shows you just how messy it is to establish control over the ocean. You have Congress, federal environmental agencies, state legislatures, and local coastal communities all trying to assert jurisdiction.
Exactly.
But okay, let's play this out. Let's say a project actually navigates the economic hurdles. It somehow survives the decade of jurisdictional lawsuits, and it actually gets built.
A minor miracle.
Right. Here's where it gets really interesting, because that leads us to the physical reality of putting giant machines in the harsh environment of the Atlantic Ocean.
Yes. This is what the report defines as the experience phase. We are finally moving past theoretical computer models and entering a real-world laboratory.
And the prime example of this laboratory is Vineyard Wind, located off the coast of Massachusetts. It is the nation's first commercial-scale offshore wind project. And because it was the first out of the gate, it is under a microscope.
A massive microscope.
And it has had some very public, very physical setbacks.
The most notable being the turbine blade failure in the summer of 2024.
Yeah, that was huge news.
This wasn't just a spreadsheet error, you know. This resulted in massive pieces of fiberglass and foam debris physically washing up across the beaches of Nantucket.
And beyond the physical breakage, there are also court filings alleging that the Vineyard Wind project is, at times, producing substantially less electricity than its advertised 806-megawatt capacity.
Now, it's important to note those claims are heavily disputed by the developers.
Right, definitely disputed. But the fact that they are locked in court over actual physical power output is pretty telling.
It is, and the corporate fallout from these physical realities is severe. You currently have the developer, Vineyard Wind, and the turbine manufacturer, GE Vernova, locked in litigation against each other.
Suing their own partners.
Yeah. They are fighting over construction delays, quality control, manufacturing standards, and this is crazy, even something as granular as $1.2 million in unpaid rent at the New Bedford Marine Commerce Terminal.
Unpaid rent. I mean, it really feels like a paradigm shift in how we view the technology itself. For a long time, offshore wind was pitched almost like a consumer electronics product.
Like a gadget.
Exactly. Like you take it out of the box, plug it in, and it just works flawlessly to save the planet. But now we are having to treat it more like a rusty bridge or a deep water oil rig.
Right. It is heavy, degrading industrial machinery that requires constant, expensive physical maintenance.
And that is exactly how Washington is starting to view it. I mean, the House Appropriations Committee is actually proposing new, substantially higher inspection fees for offshore wind facilities operating in federal waters.
Yeah. They're looking to implement strict per-turbine inspection charges.
Which makes perfect sense when you think about it. If you put thousands of tons of steel and spinning carbon fiber into a highly corrosive saltwater environment that gets battered by nor'easters, I mean, it is going to degrade.
It has to. And regardless of whether Congress adopts that exact fee structure or modifies it, the philosophical shift is undeniable at this point. Offshore wind is now officially categorized as Traditional, long-term infrastructure.
Yeah, no more magic tech.
Exactly. It demands routine physical inspections and ongoing government oversight, not just a one-time permit on opening day.
And that physical reality doesn't just affect the turbines themselves. It affects the entire ecosystem around them. Which brings us to the new science. Because now that we have these massive structures actually sitting in the water, scientists are gathering real data instead of just running simulations.
And this is perhaps the most profound part of the transition from projection to experience. We can finally measure how these installations interact with complex natural systems.
The report highlights some genuinely striking new research on this. There was a recently published 10-year modeling study of the North Sea, where they have had offshore wind for a while.
Yeah, Europe is a bit ahead of us there.
Right, and it found that large developments don't just sit passively in the water, they actually alter the ocean currents.
And the mechanism for how they do that is fascinating. When you drive hundreds of massive steel monopiles, some of them 30 to 40 feet in diameter, into the seabed, you are essentially building a giant artificial barrier.
Like an underwater fence.
Basically, these structures disrupt the natural tidal flow. They change the turbulence and the vertical mixing of the water column, which in turn can even alter localized sea surface temperatures.
Wait, it actually changes the temperature of the ocean?
Just locally around the farms, but yes.
That is wild. And that has massive implications for marine life that relies on those specific temperature gradients. And speaking of marine life, the biological impacts are just as surprising. There was another study mentioned in the report focusing on bird species living near wind farms.
Oh, the songbird study.
Yeah. The researchers found that some of these birds actually increase the volume of their songs to compensate for the continuous noise of the turbines.
It sounds almost like a quirky anecdote, right? Birds shouting over the machinery.
Yeah.
But it raises deep, serious questions about the long-term biological effects of chronic, low-frequency sound on marine ecosystems.
Exactly.
I mean, how does that continuous vibration affect the migratory patterns of marine mammals? How does the disrupted water flow affect sediment movement on the seafloor, or the spawning grounds for commercial fisheries? We are only just beginning to get the data on this.
Now, this intense focus on scientific rigor, looking at the physical breakage, the altered currents, the biological adaptations, it makes total sense when you look at the lens this data is being viewed through.
Oh, absolutely.
I want to take a second to talk about the author of this report, Dr. Michelle Parsons, because she is not your traditional energy economist.
Not at all. Her background is uniquely suited for cutting through theory and demanding evidence.
Exactly. Dr. Parsons has been a practicing physician for over 30 years. She owns a private practice specializing in integrative and aesthetic medicine, but her career has spanned the absolute extremes of the medical field. She has worked in trauma surgery, emergency medicine, and hyperbaric medicine.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it explains everything about the tone of this report.
Right.
As a physician, especially in trauma and hyperbaric medicine, she is trained to look at a highly complex, interconnected system, which is the human body, and diagnose what is actually happening based on physical symptoms and hard data.
She has to look at reality.
Exactly. She can't rely on what a textbook says should be happening if the patient in front of her is crashing.
And it gets even more intense. She also served as a U.S. Air Force flight surgeon.
Which is incredible.
She was assigned to the F-16 test center in Arizona. She deployed to places like Bosnia and Kuwait. And she was actually the first female flight surgeon ever assigned to the 67th Fighter Squadron in Okinawa, Japan.
When you have spent your career dealing with high-performance military jets and trauma patients, your tolerance for wishful thinking is zero.
Yeah, you don't care about a nice spreadsheet.
You demand scientific rigor. You demand real-world observation. You want to know if the plane will fly and if the patient will live based on the evidence right in front of you. She brings that exact same strict observational perspective to public policy.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Why should you care that a Delaware-based think tank is tracking turbine debris washing up in Massachusetts or analyzing HVDC transmission line costs off the coast of Norway?
Because the ocean is deeply interconnected, and so is our national energy grid. Delaware, or really any coastal state for that matter, cannot look at these global headlines and treat them as someone else's story.
It's all coming for us.
Exactly. The exact same macroeconomic trends, the shrinking profit margins, the jurisdictional gridlock, the unexpected environmental impacts on currents and wildlife. They're heading straight for every single state that is banking its future on this infrastructure.
And this is really the core of the Caesar Rodney Institute's foundational mission. They were founded back in 2008, named after Caesar Rodney, the Delaware founding father, who famously rode through the night to Philadelphia to secure the state's vote for independence.
Right. They are a nonpartisan free market think tank.
And their entire goal is to ensure that the decisions being made today, decisions that are going to dictate the reliability of Delaware's electric grid, the health of its coastline, and the strength of its economy for the next 50 years, are based on actual facts and sound economics.
Not outdated projections from 5 years ago when borrowing money was cheap and we hadn't actually put a blade in the water yet.
Exactly. They participate in strategic litigation, like the BOA-M and DNREC lawsuits we mentioned, and they publish this kind of rigorous analysis because they want to force government accountability.
They are trying to ensure that policymakers are actually adapting to this new real-world evidence as it emerges, rather than just blindly following an old blueprint.
Because good public policy has to begin with good information. So, to summarize the journey we've been on today, we have watched an entire industry being forced to grow up very, very fast.
Yeah, the growing pains are real.
The era of pure projection where everything looks perfect on a spreadsheet and environmental impacts are just computer models. That era is definitively over.
We have fully entered the era of observation. The economic realities of multi-billion-dollar divestments by companies like Shell and BP, the complex web of state versus federal litigation, and the stark physical evidence of broken turbines and altered ocean currents, it's all proving that operating in the ocean is vastly more complex than anyone originally projected.
Which brings us back to our blueprints. The drawings look flawless, but the physical reality is requiring a massive, expensive redesign.
And as we watch these European energy giants pull back their capital from U.S. waters to focus on more profitable ventures, it leaves us with a totally new, critical question to consider.
What's that?
If Western developers continue to step back because the profit margins are too thin, does this open the door for entirely different global players? Perhaps state-backed enterprises from other countries swooping in to buy up these federal leases at a discount. The geopolitical map of our coastal waters might just be the next thing to pivot.
Now, that is exactly the kind of hard question we need to be asking. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the sources. Keep analyzing the data, keep looking past the projections, and we'll catch you next time.